Zu links, zu utopisch, zu Klima. Zu kaufen, die Wochentaz. Die neue linke Wochenzeitung. Immer samstags neu am Kiosk.
Good evening, everybody. I welcome you to our today's talk about the West's new love affair with India. My name is Sven Hansen. I'm the Asia editor of taz, and I will be the moderator both for you here at the taz canteen and online as well. Online now or even later, so the video will be saved on YouTube, and please be aware that you can also see it in the future and also recommend it to your friends. The background of our talk tonight is the current policy of Western government towards the Indian Hindu nationalist government under Narendra Modi. After flirting with Putin's Russia has come to an end for quite obvious reasons, Western countries are now also hedging their politics towards China. De-risking has become the new buzzword for Western governments towards China, which automatically seems to make India a natural partner for the global strategies of Western democracies. This is an irony when you remember that, for example, the US refused a visa to Modi when he was the chief minister of Gujarat and has been made responsible for deadly anti-Muslim violence in 2002 there. So Modi was refused a visa for many years until he got elected as Indian Prime Minister in 2014. However, despite all this, India, of course, is a pluralist, secular, democratic country with a multi-ethnic and multi-religious population of about 1.4 billion people. Just due to its size, India is called even the largest democracy in the world. Even before Western countries distanced themselves from Russia and China, the Indian Union had become a preferred potential partner of those in the West in favor of a value-based foreign policy. The irony is that nowadays India is courted by European and North Americans who do not seem to care anymore about Indian democracy as long as India is not aligning itself with China and more distancing itself from Russia. So recently India also produced quite a few headlines enforcing this trend and giving itself a quite successful image. As you know, by most counts, India has recently overtaken China as the world's most populous country. But unlike aging China, India's population is very young. Half of the population is below 30 years old, and therefore India's population is growing in productivity while China's population is losing productivity. And today also India's economic growth rate, it has overtaken that of China, though India's economic size is still much, much smaller. But India's trend is quite positive economically. India also made headlines recently with a spacecraft it has sent to the moon, which even landed there on the dark side of the moon, which so far no other country has succeeded. And just a few days ago, you might still remember, India successfully held the G20 summit in Delhi, called by some the Modi show or the big fat Indian wedding. India was instrumental making the African Union a new member, and this way Delhi positioned itself as a strong voice of the global south. And despite all the tensions with Russia and China, the G20 summit in Delhi even ended with a declaration hardly anybody had believed in before. So, is India shining, as the campaign slogan of the Hindu nationalist BJP from 2004 stated? And is Modi, formerly the persona non grata, now the new darling of the West? Despite the mentioned successes and India getting growing prominence in Western media coverage, Indian civil society, minority rights, democratic values, and environmental resources have come under unprecedented stress. At the same time, the growing economic and political interdependence between India and the West makes it more and more critical to discuss lesser known human rights, environmental and civil society violations that are largely overlooked by Western diplomats and some media reports. Western countries have just learned bitter lessons that they were too naive in the past in dealing with Russia's and China's dictatorial practices. Are these mistakes now being repeated in dealing with India? Next spring, there will be national elections, with Modi and his BJP longing for a third consecutive term. Most observers expect them to win. We now want to discuss the developments in India in regard to the state of democracy and to its civil society. Where are reasons for concern and what can be done about it? I now want to introduce our guests. Here we have Monika Mondal. She is a freelance journalist from New Delhi. She covers science, environment, and society. Her work has appeared in both Indian and international media, including The Guardian, The Diplomat, Al Jazeera, and others. On August 31, some of you might remember, Monika wrote an opinion piece in Taz on the violation of women and minority rights in India, and that Western politicians hardly dare to mention this when courting the Indian government. On my other side, Kenneth Rosario. He is a freelance journalist from Mumbai. He had been cultural editor of the national Indian daily The Hindu. He has also been a critic there, and since working freelance, he writes on gender, on sexuality, queerness, human rights, and cinema in India, and Germany, and the UK. He has already been attached to Taz for the last year, analyzing the ways in which queer asylum seekers experience persecution. And before, 4 years ago, he has been in an exchange with Taz and then also participated in a talk on India we had then. Both our guests have been based in Germany for the last months with the prestigious Bundeskanzler Scholarship of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, but they have also been visiting India in between and have the advantage of being familiar with both in and outside perspectives. We will now discuss on the panel for about 1 hour, that's the idea, and then you in the audience, both here and online, you have the chance to raise questions, make comments. Those watching via YouTube, please use the chat function for this, and you can already do it during the panel discussion, as I will be informed about it through this screen here. I want to start with Kenneth on the issue of press freedom. As you will probably agree, press freedom is quite fundamental in a democracy. Kenneth, you have been working in quite a few newsrooms, both in India and Europe. How has press freedom developed in India under Modi, and what trends and dangers do you see?
Thanks, Sven, firstly for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. I'll start by just delving straight into some numbers. So there's the organization Reporters Without Borders releases every year something called the World Press Freedom Index, which essentially, based on various criteria, ranks different countries based on how the press functions in those individual countries. In 2016, India ranked 133. In 2023, in May, when the report came out recently, it was 161. So that's like sliding down nearly 30 countries in terms of ranking. But what sort of alarmed me more when I was looking at the report is the subcategory of security indicator, which is to say that how safe journalists actually feel or are in their country. And based on that indicator, the ranking was 172, only 8 countries following behind India, which I think is really alarming because that really speaks volumes about how journalists feel safe in the country. Now, that's just to basically lay out a background. And now I'm going to delve into sort of my experience being a journalist in India as well. when I started my journalistic career in India, it was more or less similar to the time when Modi started his prime ministership in India. So I'm talking, he started 2014, I started 2015. Initially, because it was just the start of the government, and when I was working with an Indian news channel based out of New Delhi, the censorship, so to speak, was more sporadic. It was more along the lines of you wrote a story and the story went on air, and then you get a call from Amit Shah's office, for instance, and the story would vanish within 15, 20 minutes. Along the years after, when I sort of moved a few newsrooms and eventually ended up with the Hindu, things had become more structural. And I believe that's really where most of the problem currently lies with press freedom in India, is on a more structural level, because even a publication like the Hindu would struggle because its revenues came through advertising. And I believe none of this would be news to anybody in the audience, but Indian newsrooms, particularly mainstream publications, are heavily dependent on ad revenues. And of course, because the government would then a lot of the ad revenues comes through the government or through companies that are on the good books of the government. That means revenues don't come into the newsroom, and newsrooms struggle to do certain stories against corporations or against the government itself. And then came COVID, which meant that for mainstream newspapers, particularly, the print costs went up that particular year despite COVID, where ad revenues from corporations went down. All of this has culminated into press freedom just plummeting even further. And where journalists find themselves today is unable to do stories, newsrooms unable to fund themselves, but also there is the mainstream channels that have fully gone to an extent where when you're asked to bend, you crawl, and then there's a lot of Islamophobia that happens within newsrooms because that gets invariably funded by the government as well. So that's where the newsroom sort of landscape is at the moment in India. And I think I'm going to end it and let Monika give her experience as well.
Okay, yeah, Monika, you work for national and for international media. Where you see or where you have experienced a difference in covering India?
Hello, everybody. So I cannot speak as much as Kenneth did because I started during COVID. So that ways my experience is limited time-wise, but I can give more insights on how international media and national media works very differently in India right now. So as a freelance journalist, I have a lot of advantage because that ways I can just cover what I really want. I'm extremely thankful for these granting bodies and publications who accept stories which takes time, and not just time, also a lot of effort, security, and other things. But there are very few medias left in India who would do this by themselves. First of all, Indian media do not have money. Like when I came to this office, I was like, wow, this is such a big office. I can't expect this in India because most of the publications have a limited amount of money and they don't really pay reporters so much. And of course, if you don't get a lot of money, you can't just go out and do your kind of reporting as you would like to do. So I think international media is just supporting whatever democracy is left in India right now. Yep.
But the main argument against your stories for Indian media is the money, or is it that they just take the money argument, but in reality, maybe the issue is too hot for them?
So when you talk about Indian media, it's not just Indian media. We have two kinds of media right now. One media would be more vibrant, and they want to do real stories, tell stories of people, what's really happening with the India that we see and live in. And there's this other kind of media which is totally run by money, and the power speaks on those news channels or on those news media outlets. So there's this divide. The people who have power backing them up, of course, they have money and they are sending their journalists to USA and to I don't know where else because they have money. But the people who do not have money, they are struggling.
Yeah, but I mean, have you experienced that they bluntly told you, oh, this story is maybe too hot, or just create trouble with that story?
I have been really blessed with amazing editors, so nobody has spoken like that, but there are reservations in different form, like people would not have money to invest in the kind of projects that I want to do. I mostly do long-form investigative journalist pieces, so it takes weeks or months to do, in most cases, months to do one story. So if I don't get enough money, I can't do those stories. So I need that kind of money, and because I also need to survive. So, but with Indian media, expectations of you doing a story of this length is very difficult unless you get some grant from some independent agency or some other bodies.
Okay. Kenneth, there's one person probably everybody here has heard about already. She's an author by the name of Arundhati Roy. She just makes strong statements. Just last week again she did when she received a writer's prize. And she even speaks of fascism in India under the BJP government. She calls elections in India, which elections are a sign of democracy, but she calls that in India a season of murder and lynching and the most dangerous time for Indian minorities. Arundhati Roy, no doubt, has a name in the West and she has an audience in the West. How is her role in India? Does she serve as a proof that the situation there is not that bad, so you still have freedom of expression? Or do Indian media ignore her and people don't listen to her anymore? So, I mean, by some she's even called a traitor or an anti-national person. Has she been marginalized already in India? How you see her role there by Indian media and as a writer in India?
So firstly, I don't think Arundhati Roy speaking on an international platform in France says a lot about Indian media freedom back in India. Firstly, there are two different things. I think what Indian media suffers from quite strongly is the mainstream media. So we are talking about television and print largely, which reaches the masses. That's not to say that there is not great work, some fantastic work coming out of India when it comes to online journalism. And there's been lots of great publications to some really good journalistic work, really good investigative work when it comes to online. So Arundhati Roy particularly is not an exception when it comes to speaking about India critically. There are many other Indian writers, Indian journalists who, I mean, I can, off the top of my head, I can think of like Bharat, for instance, writes for Washington Post and she's really critical. Rana Ayub used to write for, again, Washington Post, I think.
Yeah, but are they reported in Indian media, or is it just they are outside media they can write about, but locally or nationally they are ignored?
Exactly. So the point here with Arundhati Roy getting prominence outside is what Monika also touched upon previously, is the international media is really where most of the mainstream space is left for any Indian journalist to do really good critical work. The mainstream space domestically, I think, has shrunk to barely one or two print publications. I can't think of a single television channel that used to be NDTV, no longer is, who does any critical work. So it's the print really that, I mean, I can think of at least in the English press, not speaking for regional press, the Hindu or Indian Express would do some amount of critical reportage. But like you said, with all the other prominent critics, they usually have to go to international publications or to digital publications within India itself. And Arundhati Roy has often and has for a long time gotten international attention because of the Man Booker Prize in the 90s, so on and so forth. And she's heard, she's visible, and is sort of at the center of attention for the West, or the Western media in general, but there are lots of other critics, but you're right, they usually have to resort to international publications or digital ones in India. That's at least my experience.
So there's an irony. She speaks out, we think, okay, you have freedom of expression, because we can listen to her. She is very critical, but inside India, she is hardly being heard.
Yes and no. Inside India, she's being heard in certain sections of society. I wonder how much that has permeated, the quote-unquote the masses, or India at large. Because India, as you know, is a big country, is very diverse, complicated. English may not be the only language that people speak. All of those things really limit Arundhati Roy's reach within India, even though she might be known in certain spaces. But yeah, all of those factors really make her, I wouldn't say she's like the beacon of, but she's one of them. She is one of them. And there are quite a few critics within India that are still doing some good work.
Okay. Monika, environmental and climate issues are some of your main subjects. I remember when Modi took over in 2014, he promised that he wants to focus on economic growth and that he wants to accelerate the construction of infrastructure programs. And in those days, the fear was that communities affected by big projects cannot make themselves heard anymore, because the priority is just to finish projects which might endanger the life. So how is the situation today? Is there a chance for communities still being heard which are affected by big projects?
I would not like to say in a one-word answer, but so if we see how Prime Minister Modi has worked, even in the past, in 2002 when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, their main focus has always been on infrastructure. And the BJP, when it came to power, even then a lot of things were around infrastructure. They come from this family of, this idea of thought wherein you display a lot by working on things. And it's a very business-oriented government. So a lot of money has gone into infrastructure, and now, as you see, a lot of focus is again on infrastructure development, on building big projects and stuff like that. So this is what they do, and this is what they have been doing, and this has led them to the power. So of course they are not going to leave it, because this is what that is getting them power or vote or whatever we want to call that. But beyond that, because they want to focus on this kind of development, a lot of voice has been taken from the ground, and they have been made shut, because of course the kind of development plans that this government have in front of them in terms of energy, infrastructure, in terms of agricultural produce, or whatever you talk about, they have just big numbers in mind. They just want to double everything, want to increase the numbers, and the focus is there. And if you just, I won't go too much in the past, if you just focus on the monsoon sessions that held like a few months ago, there were like, I guess, around 27 bills that were discussed, and most of the bills that were discussed, they were passed, and these bills actually took away the voice from the people. Now you don't have any good regulations on forest. Anybody can come and take anybody's land in village or in hilly areas, and people can't do anything because the laws do not have anything in them left, because they have been invented in such a way that maybe I should not be speaking so out loud about these things. I don't know, because things are not really safe back home. But yes, if you just look at what things have happened in the past, how laws are being implemented, how laws are being changed, how the entire fabric of democracy, how people are elected, that there was a bill a few days ago wherein they were discussing to change the Election Commission of India. And now according to the new law, they want to make this electoral body, which would head this election commission chief. And this body would be comprised of the Prime Minister, one union minister, which would be nominated by the Prime Minister, and leader of opposition. So if this is how elections are going to happen, or if this is the idea of conducting elections, then what is democracy? I don't know why I said this, but yeah.
Okay. Kenneth, you have been a cultural editor and a cultural critic, and still focus on Indian films. I think most people here have seen Bollywood films, and Bollywood has a lot of fans in Germany as well. So, how has the Hindu nationalist government affected the cultural sector? From films to textbooks, history textbooks, from renaming cities and places to academic freedom. So how has culture been affected by Hindu nationalist politics?
So this ties into a lot of things I've said previously, which is mainstream media communication. There are sort of various parts to this. One would be television, print, and then there is mass media, which is film. Or film is a big part of it. And then there's obviously Bollywood, which is not all of Indian cinema, but a part of Indian cinema. In 2019, I remember, when Modi won a second time, I think it was before, or it was the day of elections or the day of result, this film came out called Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I think it's called, which is a biopic, where this actor called Vivek Roy plays him. Terrible film. A couple of months before that was another film, I think where they had a really comical Manmohan Singh and a really comical Sonia Gandhi. I don't remember the film, but I remember there was Anupam Kher in it. From there, where you sort of had these really sort of caricaturish political propaganda films that nobody would take seriously, people would watch and laugh it off. Some people would fall for it, maybe. Cinema has, at least Bollywood, has come a long way in being instrumentalized quite strongly by this current government. So you have the Kashmir Files, for instance, followed by the Kerala story, followed by...
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Oh,
because,
yeah, sorry.
Maybe not everybody's aware.
So the Kashmir Files is this film made by this filmmaker called Vivek Agnihotri about Kashmir and about what he calls the genocide of Kashmiri Hindu Pandits. Basically, the problem with the film is that it outrightly and horrendously vilifies Muslims in Kashmir. An explicitly propaganda film that not just did well in the cinemas, but also was endorsed by the government and was subsidized quite strongly in many states. So there's not just this one film that an openly right-wing supporter of the government makes, but also is then supported and then promoted, right? It's a massive success. Recently also won a couple of national awards, which is given by the government. So you have that as a precedent, right? And for that follows with the Kerala story, which nobody would have ever heard about if not for this precedent that came with the Kashmir Files. So then you have the Kashmir Files, you have the government saying, oh, look, there's the Kashmir Files, now we should watch the Kerala story, which has, basically the Kerala story is again set in Kerala, and it talks about, it claims that 32,000 women from Kerala, Muslim women from Kerala, left Kerala and went to join the ISIS, I think, which is not just a massive exaggeration, but like the actual cases like 3 or 6 women or something of that sort. Obviously, there's an agenda to that. And why Kerala? One can think about it because Kerala is a state where BJP has almost no support. So, these things add up. Why Kashmir? Of course, you also understand because it's a very contentious issue and people have strong sentiments attached to Kashmir. So you have Kerala story becoming sort of a hit, people going and watching it, falling for the propaganda. Again, these are films, honestly, nobody would care about if not for state support that comes with these films. And then there is Gadar 2 that came out a couple of weeks ago. Again, a film that it's a sequel of a film that came out in the early 2000s, anti-Pakistan. Its sequel came out last month, again, sort of playing hard on the anti-Pakistan sentiment, therefore anti-Muslim sentiment, so on and so forth, becoming a massive hit. You get the trend. And what is happening based from 2019 when there were these comical-ish propaganda films, now propaganda films that people not just consume, but also believe in, I think that's a very alarming trend. And that's also something that I personally feared back then because we all in the newsroom laughed at Modi's biopic that came out in 2019, because it is really silly. But you can no longer laugh about it because people do consume and people do believe in these films. So in that way, film is quite strongly instrumentalized in India as a propaganda tool, and yeah.
But I think there have also been other cases, like the last film of Shahrukh Khan. Like some people called for a boycott. I mean, Shahrukh Khan is an Indian superstar of Bollywood. He's a Muslim, and there was a boycott by Hindu nationalists about his film, and that totally backfired.
That's correct. Shahrukh Khan, so a bit of a background. So last year, his son was falsely booked under a drug case as a sort of a vindication for Shahrukh Khan. So that's a bit of a backdrop of what happened to him last year. Followed by that, this year he had 2 releases so far, which is Pathaan and then Jawan. Pathaan is the film I suppose you're referring to, where a lot of right-wing trolls online sort of attack the film. I don't even remember the issue, to be honest. I thought for a while it was about the saffron bikini that Deepika Padukone had worn. I don't remember what the bigger controversy was after that. I don't know, Monika, if you remember.
Just the bikini.
Just the bikini, yeah. But then there's Jawan, which is this film that just recently released, I think 2 weeks ago. It has been likened quite a lot by critics to be the resurgence of the angry young man. The angry young man is the 70s trope of a hero embodied by Amitabh Bachchan, who's another superstar, sort of a Bollywood superstar then and now as well, which is about this man, this figure of a man who is fully drained off by the system and the economy is terrible, the politics is terrible, society has no hope, and he rebels, he's angry. And Jawan is, for a lot of people, a sort of a new age angry young man figure Shahrukh Khan's bringing to the fore. What's actually funny, and in the film, that I don't want to give too many spoilers, but there's a strong anti-establishment sentiment, but it's never really named. So BJP would think the establishment is Congress pre-2014. Congress thinks it's establishment now. AAP thinks it's BJP, whatever. So because they haven't really named who the establishment is, it can be. But the thing is, cinema at the moment, at least when it comes to critical work, you have to write between the lines. And Jawan has done that, and that's really where I think the hope and the scope lies. Because if Shahrukh Khan had to name anti-establishment, I don't think the film would even come close to a release.
Okay. Monika, recently a lot of eyebrows have been raised when suddenly there was an invitation by the president of Bharat. So you might recall, some of you, there was this G20 summit, and the Indian president, she invited all the guests for I think state dinner, and she invited them as the president of Bharat. Bharat is a Hindu name for India. It's also named in the constitution, where you have both India and Bharat. It was very strange because people were suddenly afraid or became aware that maybe the whole country gets a different name now. So, I mean, Bharat, you know, the BJP is Bharataya, I forgot the other, Janata, I think, party. Yeah, so it's Bharat is a real Hindu name, while India is a colonial but also secular name, yeah? So what is your interpretation of this strange name play?
I don't know what the reality is, but there is a lot of gossip around this topic. To begin with, I don't know if you guys are aware of this India Alliance thing. So the opposition, we don't really have an opposition right now because it's like a lot of parties coming together, forming an alliance. So this alliance came together in order to challenge Modi in the next elections. And they have formed an alliance which is named I.N.Di. India with
So
dots,
India,
basically.
yeah. It's 28 parties giving
Yes.
themselves the name of India. Yeah.
Right. So that's how it began. And I don't know what happened in the rooms or in the parliament or where they talk. But all of a sudden, India was now Bharat. This actually began from the letter that you're mentioning. So G20 guests were given this invite saying, President of Bharat invites you for the dinner and stuff. And the opposition says that it happened because the other party is a bit nervous about them using the name India. So I think it's just a child's play, like people are just teasing each other and using important time, parliament time, to discuss these things, and space, important digital space to discuss these things, where they can speak about other things, like India is going through a really terrible time in terms of what's happening in the Northeast, employment, youth, whatever we talk about. And still, they're just talking about India versus Bharat. So I don't know what the ambitions are.
Kenneth, what was your interpretation of that case, that incident?
I agree with Monika. It's just very comical. It makes, well, look, it's comical because of the intent, which is to not, or to take away the power from the opposition to call themselves an India alliance, whereas A is part of, now they're calling it India alliance because the A stands for alliance in the end. The reasoning is comical. It does make me a bit worried personally, and as a journalist as well, because none of these comical thoughts have fully been just left as comical thoughts. A lot of them have come to fruition previously as well, and this government is sort of capable of doing or going ahead with, whims and desires. I mean, a bit of a backgrounder on this, as Monika mentioned as well, but the Indian Constitution does say India, that is Bharat. So Bharat as a word or as a name, which is, like you pointed out, the Hindi sort of an origin name, is part of the Constitution, even though it's not fully interchangeably used. And as far as I understand, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but as far as I understand, you can't interchangeably you can't use Bharat in English abroad. It has to be India. And so in order to do that, you have to fully then change the name of the country, which we are talking about, not just logistics, but also a huge amount of costs. And that's completely, to my mind at least, unfounded, and it makes no sense.
But I mean, so far there have been also efforts by changing history textbooks. I mean, rewrite the history. Isn't that part of it? Or might turn out to be part of it, meaning enlarging the Hindu history and making smaller the Muslim history?
Yeah, that is, I mean, it is true. I suppose the intent partly is to not just make a whole new country, but also to brand it as a whole new country. And that's sort of the vision. I still struggle to understand what is it going to lead to, like what's the end goal with changing name. Like I understand there are other intents. It's not like India as a term or as a word was sort of vilified before or exclusively used by critics of the government, whereas the government always said Bharat, and then suddenly, like I fail to understand where this has come from. Like I fail to understand the origin of it. But yeah, the history textbooks, as you mentioned, so I think it is in the Delhi syllabus, the CBSE, which is the Central Board of Secondary Education. They've removed references to the Mughals, removed some references, as far as I remember, to the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, which also means that this is not just, so the ruling party sort of envisions itself to be in this seat for a long time. And it is a part of the agenda is to not just capture the voter base that is at the moment, but also the future generations, to create a sort of a larger narrative, so to speak. And you're right, the history textbook is a part of it. But also, I think academia in general has been impacted by this narrative. And quite recently, this private university called Ashoka University a professor at the Ashika University, an associate professor, I believe, who wrote a paper on, or a paper on the possibility of manipulation, electoral manipulation in 2019. The paper got a lot of attention from the ruling party. Subsequently, the university distanced themselves from the academic, which led to the academic resigning, followed by a few other academics resigning, followed by their data center sort of shutting down or becoming hollowed out, which means that, and Ashoka, before this controversy, in some ways was doing quite a bit of critical work, at least within the academia, and that space seems to be affected. Public universities do that, but then public universities would directly come under the domain of the government, and therefore you see, so you have the media being affected, you have the mainstream culture being affected or curtailed, and then you have academia now being targeted as well. So yeah, it's like a 360-degree back.
Okay, Monika, one of your focus in reporting is society as well, and of course also the issue of women. How is the Hindu nationalist government affecting women? In your recent article at Taz, you also highlighted the case of sexual violence against women in the conflict in Manipur. How do you see the developments under the Modi government?
I don't think there is a development. If I'm allowed to use the opposite of development, I would rather use that. How can you expect in this century women being paraded naked in a democracy, in the world's largest democracy, being raped on the streets in front of several other men and women and police? And while all of this is happening, everybody is just watching. So if this is happening in this era or in this year, I don't think I need to answer anything else about how the condition of women has been taken care of under this government. And not just that, the Minister of Women and Child Development is a woman. The post she holds the name Woman and Child in her post itself, and still she's never seen talking about stuff that really matters. She picks up issues like a member of parliament giving her flying kiss. This is a big issue. But women being paraded naked and murdered and raped on the street is not so important for some people, especially the Minister of Women and Child Development. Other President of India is woman. She belongs to this tribal community. She is like this signpost for this government to show how friendly they are with the women and how much they support women, and also not just any women from a tribal community. And then they use her to send letters which says President of Bharat. So, and there is no parliament debate up till now on this issue of Manipur, which is still burning, which is where women and children are being still murdered every day. But these are not really the issues. So yeah, this is the focus of this government on issues of women.
Kenneth, another issue and also one of your focuses is the sexual minorities and LGBTQ rights. And the Indian Supreme Court is on the verge of announcing its verdict on same-sex marriages. And interestingly, I found you see a complicated relationship between the LGBTQ movement and the right-wing Hindutva politics, as there are certain sections which support and use this issue to further vilify Muslims and paint them as homophobic. Can you elaborate on this? I mean, it's I think a very interesting combination, which I took some time to realize there's some explosiveness in it. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is quite complicated. So the same-sex, or let's just say marriage equality case, marriage equality, the willingness, not the willingness, the need to have marriage equality in India is currently in the Supreme Court. while this was happening, quite a few right-wing, Hindu right-wing trolls, thinkers, supporters online sort of supported the passing of marriage equality. Subsequently followed by the RSS chief, or RSS head, sort of tacitly giving his support as well. All of this, to me, is linking back to 2019, when the abrogation of Kashmir happened, where I remember there was this one group called the Hindu Queer Group. I may get their name wrong. That sort of came out with a statement saying that this is the taking back of Kashmir in many ways is liberating the LGBTQ population of Kashmir.
To make it clear, in 2019, Kashmir lost its autonomy and became under rule of the central government. So
in 2019, Kashmir was sort of lost its statehood, so to speak, and was incorporated into India. My fear with the way marriage equality case or the queer movement in India is heading is in line with what I see happening in the West, particularly in Europe, Western Europe, and a bit in America, where is to use queer movement, to use queer people, queer lives, as a scapegoat to vilify other communities. You see that happening quite a lot in Western Europe under this term called homo-nationalism, where is to say that we are accepting good Western Europeans and the Muslim refugees and the Muslim migrants are against queer people, and therefore create a narrative or create this agenda. And I see the beginning of that in India, the roots of that in India taking place in various circles, anecdotally, online, and in some narratives in the media as well. And that's my biggest fear with the marriage equality case as well. And then I often ask myself, who is it for? Who are the beneficiaries of the marriage equality case? Because as the Indian queer movement stands at the moment, I see so many struggles that come before marriage. And I see how caste plays into marriage. And then I see, is the point to like carry forward these caste dynamics within the queer people, or I won't say queer, but I will say just same sex, that's gays and lesbians. And then comes the whole conversation about where does this leave trans people? Because as far as I understand, marriage equality doesn't include trans people. India, along with several South Asian countries, has a proud heritage, well, not a proud, but has a history of indigenous, so to speak, trans identities, right? So you have your hijras, for instance.
You wrote one story in Taz about Pakistan. So
right, I wrote a story about this for Taz on Pakistan, which is a whole different case with the Supreme Court and trans rights movement there. Where does this marriage equality or passing of marriage equality or giving same-sex couples a right to marry their partner leave trans people and leave these other forms of kinship within the hijra communities? I don't see them fitting into this. And therefore, it takes me back into thinking, who is this for? And when we think about the queer movement in India, where are our priorities lying, and how the priorities or the beneficiaries of this law that could pass, how that sort of then ties into the dangers of being co-opted by the Hindu nationalist agenda. And that is where I'm coming from when I think along these lines. And I do see the beginnings of that, and it does worry him a bit. Sorry, if I may add, because with the queer movement generally, at least around 2018, 17, when when Section 377 was still around, which is this section that criminalizes homosexuality. It was taken back or partially struck down in 2018, I believe. A lot of argument was along the lines of, look, we have Hindu temples, look, we have a Hindu heritage of queerness in India, which is true and can be a good thing, but also can be a bad thing, because then you sort of posit Hindus as more accepting historically, and the Muslim Mughals, or Muslims in general, or even Christians, as with whatever the Bible says, as unaccepting of queerness. And I do see how this can sort of play out and become a problem.
But maybe you can explain to us how is the position of the BJP towards same-sex marriage, for example?
Negative, as far as I understand. I think they sort of tried. They've either stayed out from the case, or then they said no. But I don't think they are for same-sex marriage. But where I'm coming from is elements within the party, and I come from individuals within the party. I come from a space of like particular quote unquote thinkers or people from within the community who align themselves with the party, and that can coalesce into a broader trend going forward.
Okay, Monika, another issue is science. It's also one of your subjects. Recently, we had this moon spacecraft, and I saw on X, the former Twitter, you tweeted about India's recent moon mission. Is that something you are proud of, or should the government have invested the billions of money into reducing poverty instead? And how you see the role of the moon mission play in Indian politics, and especially in regard to the current government?
I'm really glad that you asked this question, because in the West, when we see I see a lot of people talking about this actually, that a lot of money has been spent on this moon mission, could have gone on people's plate or somewhere else. But first of all, we spent $74 million something on this entire moon mission. Like, we went there.
It's less than the budget of Barbie.
Yes. And you're making movies with the same budget. So this is, people should learn from India how it is. Cheap labor is one, but other factors also exist. So people should go and investigate how they're doing this amazing stuff. And given that we don't have much money, given that our systems run pretty much on jugaad, that's the word we call for fixing things where problem exists. And they're still doing it. Like, when this moon mission was accomplished, there were videos on Twitter and other social media of how this began. Like in the 1960s, 70s, how people carried missiles on back of their cycle, like bike. And this was funny for me to see that these people who are sending these big things on moon were carrying their payloads and missiles and everything and cylinders on the back of bullock carts and bikes and cycles and things like this. So we have come a long way, and we started when we were just on the verge of having this new democracy. We had no clue how to do this. We were very new. We had a very bad colonial history. We had riots. We had so many terrible things happening. And then we started from there, and this is where we have reached in such a small span of time. And I think this is amazing. And when we talk about how this everything started, when we talk about NASA or ESA or other agencies, it began when USA was fighting with Russia. Like, who wants to, we have already killed people on the land, so now let's go up in the air and shoot people from there. So this was basically the idea of developing space agencies or space science to have vast operation or to have more surveillance and things like that. But India never started with this agenda. We only started because we wanted to understand, okay, how is the rain is going to happen, if the monsoon is going to come on time. So it was pretty much on those lines, on the welfare of people, and that's what we have been doing up till now, mostly. Of course, there's communications and there are other things.
So you don't want to fight China, you mean?
What?
You don't want to fight China, for example? Or China wants
Now
to?
we are thinking, people are giving us money and ideas, and we are like, okay, this sounds good. So we are doing that. Defeating China is on the number one target list of things to do, especially with the BJP government. But the realities will speak for itself, and we have to wait. We might have to wait for centuries to see the day when India will defeat China in all the things that they claim.
Okay, coming back to my question about what does the moon mission stand for politically? I mean, is it uniting Modi and the people, or is it? Is he the one getting most applause for it?
So a lot of things have happened in favor of the current ruling party recently, to begin with this moon landing, of course, and then this G20. And they are using these things in a different form. Then they are trying to celebrate the leader using these as tools. So G20 happened, declaration came out, Delhi declaration came out. Why? Because Modi was there. But Bali declaration also came out. All other declarations also came out. It's like part of the process. You go, sit in a meeting, at the end of it, you put out a declaration. So, but this point was made into a big show, and there were flower showers on Modi and other things happening. This is one part of it. And when you talk about the ISRO, the moon landing, even then, it did not really happen in the last few years. The Chandrayaan 3 happened because Chandrayaan 2 happened, and before that Chandrayaan 1 happened, and before that many other launches happened. That happened because of that. It wasn't because of just one person, but this idea is not out in the public. Because, of course, people in India, they are very emotional. They just see things and they believe in them, and majority of Indians, they might think that, okay, we are beggars, we are on the street, we don't have food to eat, house to stay, but at least Modi sent a missile or something to moon. People might be happy with that. And this is what the reality is for the people who vote based on emotions and not on statistics, or not on policies, or not on how many debates happened on which issues. People don't really understand these things. And these people then take advantage of the innocence of people and use things in their favor.
Kenneth, you think the same?
Yeah, I think I would pretty much agree. Yeah, I think it's the one thing that the government is good at is taking credit of other people. And I think that's quite evident with the moon landing. I mean, going back to like the initial topic of mainstream media coverage, at least that's how it was projected. If you looked at mainstream media coverage, it's either that the space was used for the government, which is a prime minister's face, or the media people themselves for self-promotion. So you see people in newsrooms sort of crying. But that's not the point of the moon landing, and that's just the only thing I would add to what Monika said. Is just it's taking away of credit of belongs to someone else, and rightly so. I mean, there's really nothing to not be proud of the work that they've done. One could argue whether the money could go somewhere else, but like Monika mentioned, the money compared to other nations is not that much.
Okay, interesting. I remember having a discussion in a strategic institute in India about, 20-25 years ago, shortly after India successfully tested nuclear weapons. And while we were discussing, the electricity always went on and off and on and off. And I found it absurd, on the one hand, having nuclear weapons, on the other hand, not being able to provide a leading institute with a stable electricity. So for me, it was quite a contradiction. But anyway, I think there are different views, and it's interesting to learn about your views. Kenneth, when we discussed about preparing this talk, you mentioned one point I found quite interesting. There is a role of the diaspora. Yeah? In many countries, you have a quite strong Indian communities. And also, I'm not sure whether you are aware, recently when we had the G20 summit, the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, he was, of course, also in Delhi. Some might recall that his plane broke down, as our German planes sometimes broke down, so it took him 2 days later to take off. But anyway, he was criticized by Modi because Canada has the second largest Sikh community in the world after Punjab, and Modi criticized him for allowing separatist Sikhs to have a protest in his country. So Modi government is playing a more and more important role in these diaspora Indian communities. So Kenneth, how is the BJP changing the political discourse in diaspora circles today?
I will again start with some numbers on this one. So according to, I think, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, nearly 30 million Indians are living around the world, so which is making it the biggest diaspora in the world.
I think the Chinese is bigger, I would say. But
as far as diaspora is concerned?
We can't debate it. But anyway, 30 million is quite a lot, no question.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. Which is big in number, but also is big in influence in many countries, right? So because it's second or third generation now in the US, in the UK, with people holding various positions of power, including Rishi Sunak in the UK, for instance, Kamala Harris in the US, there's the other guy who's trying to run against Donald Trump in America, Vivek Ramaswamy, so on and so forth. How is the BJP politics affecting diaspora politics? I would say, at least based on what I see around, based on my experience of having lived as part of the diaspora for the last 3 odd years, I think it has quite a strong influence. And the one case I would bring out to sort of flesh out a bit is the clashes or the riots that took place in Leicester in UK last year, where there were clashes between a group of Hindus and a group of Muslims in Leicester in the UK. And I think the conflict was a lot of Hindu migrants coming to Muslim settlements and there was a lot of forwarding of messages on WhatsApp as usual. And then later was found to have some links or some influences, at least from the RSS in India. And you see these sort of developments happening sporadically, but also as a trend around the world, including in places like the UK, where there are second or third generation Indians. And I only see this sort of growing, this sort of a trend growing. But the thing is, Indian diaspora is not like one unity, right? It's Indian diaspora can be many things. It can be people who like, at least Monika and I, on a similar sort of political thinking. And then there are, of course, people who are more influenced by the Hindu writing agenda. I fear which of the two gets into the position of power, and I see that sort of affecting the Indian politics abroad. But also the thing with Indians abroad is that they can't really vote if you've given up your citizenship. So it's more of influence along the social lines, and I think that's happening quite strongly.
Okay, we soon have to come to an end. I still have 2 questions, and then you have the chance to make comments or also raise questions, also online. So far, I have not gotten any questions. So, Monika, my experience with India is that the anti-colonial reflexes in India are quite strong, meaning nearly all Indian politicians from whatever party, they strongly reject criticism by Western governments, and I think rightly they argue that Western countries committed the crime of colonialism, and therefore they argue Westerners have no right to criticize India. We have been quite critical here of the current government, so how should Western governments and politicians deal with this? Can they somehow raise critical points in a credible way at all? How would you advise a Western politician meeting an Indian politician and complaining about the state of democracy? How should he behave or she behave?
Very difficult question for a journalist with 3 years of experience. But I think there is a lot of show-off, not just from the BJP government, but from all the leaders across the world. At one front, leaders like Biden, they talk about democracy, they talk about media power, they talk about every rosy picture they can paint. And on the other front, they are handshaking with leaders like Modi, leaders like Salman, and it's all okay for them to do this. And because these are the people who fought a war saying that democracy is a better option, everybody should adopt it. So now if people are adopting it and then you are supporting these people who are killing people like in broad daylight, then what kind of support this is? And this is just this bigotry in the promises of West. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. Like I cover climate and environment. And we have been talking about this green fund and this fund that the colonial powers owe to the developing countries. There's so much talk. What's happening? Is the money coming? And if the money is coming, where is it going? Recently, I read that one of these governments, they bought a big forest land saying that it's for carbon credits. They bought a land in a different country. This is not right. And then these governments in the West, they support these ideas, they support these people, they support these faces. And when you support a political party, you are supporting all the policies that come with it. I mean, I don't say that stop everything, but at least when these people met for G20, somebody could have said some things about the state of affairs which are going on in India. They were moving through the streets. These streets have people on both sides whose house have been bulldozed because Delhi had to look really beautiful and shiny for these foreigner people, and they had to eat in silver utensils and gold spoons and whatnot. So I forgot the question.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Kenneth can help us. So Kenneth, how should this criticism be raised by, let's say, Mr. Biden or Mr. Scholz or Macron when they come to Delhi? How can they be credible?
So, yeah. So,
Frau Baerbock as well, yes, of course.
I think a part of your question was, as a colonial enterprise, can you critique India, right?
Yeah, not as a colonial enterprise, but as a politician coming from a country who has been colonizing others and who has committed either crimes itself or has been quite quiet about colonial crimes.
See, there's hypocrisy everywhere, right? Like you can't, if you say the US has its problems, which means it can't stand up for human rights, or the UK or I don't know, Germany has its problems, so you can't stand for human rights. I think then you sort of you run in circles, and you're going to keep ending up nowhere. I think this sort of a colonial burden of we can't critique India because India has been historically on the side of the marginalized or being exploited, I think that somewhere falls right into the narrative of the government.
Yes, of course.
Right? So the government would tell you that, look, we've been colonized for far too long from foreigners, but then by certain ruling party for 70 years, it claims as some form of colonization. Then you have sporadic like Arundhati Roy's speech and others, and then those are discredited as, oh, look, they are sort of cozying up to our colonizers. And I think that really doesn't help anybody. And I think in that regard, if a Western democracy is claiming to be a democracy with, as we understand democracy to be, which includes press freedom, it includes freedom of expression, includes minority rights, then that ought to be stood up for on international grounds as well, right? India does claim to be a democracy as well. As we've established in this one last hour, it really doesn't function as one anymore. At least that's what we believe. There might be people who disagree with us. And therefore, the Western countries then do have to stand for these values, right? The reason why they're not standing for these values with Modi, it's up to, I mean, it's not, I can only guess, I can only conjecture, and of course that's money, there's future, there's like resources, there's a geopolitical agenda. It's causing up to India to sort of create a ready wall against China. And there are those factors. But if you really do stand up for democratic rights, then the one thing I can think of as recent example is when, speaking of G20, when Biden came to India, he was categorically told you can't have any press interaction. And Biden said nothing. There wasn't a press interaction, either on the Indian side or the American side. And if you had to say that in America, that wouldn't float, right? When Modi went there, they somehow managed to get him into a press conference, finally, and one question was asked. The reporter, who happened to be a Muslim reporter, was extremely vilified online in India, so much so that the White House had to then step up and support her. And then Biden went to Vietnam to do a press conference on what happened in India. So, and that was fine, that was acceptable. And that sort of makes you wonder then that if you're standing up for these tenets, how much are you willing to stand up for it?
Okay, I would assume the Vietnamese had no problem that he was talking about India and not Vietnam. Okay, we come to my last question. We've been talking about the government in India a lot, but there's of course also other parties. There's an opposition, there's a Congress party, there's the Aam party. So what do you think of their politics? Do they make a difference? Do they give you hope, or is it not that good as they have been influenced by the BJP? How you see it, Monika?
So Indian politics right now it's full of drama. It's like any Bollywood sequel going on. Every day there's some new news and we wonder what is going to happen. So India is a very diverse country, and it's not just limited with people, languages, culture, dress, food, etc. It also is very diverse in terms of its political sphere. There are many regional parties, and it's very difficult for one single party to have entire sweep over the country. Recently, there are some opposition parties who have made a win in some of the states, which gives them a good point to think that they might win in the elections next year. Elections are next year, it begins around May, April sometime. So there are some opposition parties, and first of this alliance, the India Alliance, this is the biggest party which have come with many regional political alliances, and they want to challenge BJP, and that's their entire agenda of having come to this point. They want to defeat BJP in the next elections, and for which they have made this alliance. But this alliance is also not very strong because one of the party members already left. AAP was in the alliance before. AAP is the party that rules Delhi and Punjab. But they already left because of a bill that was passed in parliament, and the other alliance did not support, and the bill was passed, so there was some drama into it, and that's why they left. There are other political parties from Orissa, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala. Kerala supports the alliance, but the other ones, they do not. So it's still very difficult to say if we have a strong opposition and if we have a face of the opposition. But having said that, when the BJP came into power in 2014, one of the things that they used very intelligently was the social media and internet, which the other political parties realized very late. But now they have understood the value of social media. So one of the faces of possible opposition for Modi could be Rahul Gandhi, who is the member of the opposition party, and he is doing these YouTube videos and interacting with people, with poor people, with people who needs to be heard. So this is all going on, and I would not say it's a fail attempt. It is going really well. But we still do not know, because after this G20 happened, after this pomp and splendor of ISRO happened, we can never know what the normal Indian is thinking, because majority of India lives in those places where nobody really goes with mic and ask them who you are going to vote or what you are thinking. So it's really difficult to judge, but from whatever we see on the screen and what we read from these opposition parties, I think they are giving good competition, if not bad. But there is no power left for the opposition. The parliament is pretty much non-functional, I would say. Only the things which supports commercialization, industrialization, certain sections of the society are being passed. So development is happening in India, but only in few corners, which everybody can see, but not everybody can take advantage of.
Kenneth, who gives you hope in India?
It's a very hard one. At this moment, at this particular moment, I'm more pessimistic than optimistic. And I particularly don't see much, based on my assessment and like my conversations and my understanding, much hope in the coming elections. Even though the alliance, it's more of a grouping. Like Monika said, one person's already left. So I wonder if it's actually an alliance. It's more like a grouping of a few parties coming together. It has potential. It's probably one of those. It probably is the biggest potential. Let's just put it that way. I don't see any other party single-handedly managing to do it. The biggest challenge, of course, then is to stay together. And if it's falling apart a year before elections, I wonder how it's going to go in the run up to the elections. What also makes me a bit skeptical is I have a feeling, sort of a premonition, of the ruling party doing something big closer to the election, as they always do. And there's the Ram Mandir opening up. Ram Mandir is this massive temple that they're building over Ayodhya, which is opening in January 2024, close to the elections. One of the things that's already something to look forward to, but there are many of these things that come together in favor of the current party. I think the biggest of which for me is the media. The biggest for me is just the lack of anyone to talk about anything domestically. So even if there was any critique to be made, there's just not much avenue on a mass scale. And that makes me, until that changes, makes me a bit pessimistic. I don't know if we have the time, but there's also the alliance, the India alliance, putting out this new circular a couple of days ago about not going on the shows of 14 news anchors who they believe are openly communal. As true as it is, it seems already to have sort of backfired on them in terms of the image that the ruling party has spun around, saying it's anti-freedom of expression, which is the biggest irony, but it's an argument that seemingly is catching on. And I'm sort of the opinion that if the alliance were to do this, I don't think making it, you're allowed to not go on these shows without actually making it one of your biggest strategies publicly. And I think that would have worked better, in my opinion. And I see like tiny things like these eventually building up into something bigger and eventually potential defeat. But it's too soon to tell. I'm pessimistic at the moment.
Maybe to explain, it's a bit like as if here politicians state that they want to boycott Bild-Zeitung because it's producing hatred and violence and the like. And so in India, 14 news anchors are being boycotted by this alliance. They are very strong. Some of them are the most popular news anchors in mostly, I think, private TV channels on news shows. And this alliance has announced they don't want to work with them together, as they are seen as biased, as they are seen as promoting hatred, and as they are seen as supporters of the BJP. So that was a declaration, and as Kenneth said, they are now being charged of being against press freedom. Okay, so we have gone through many subjects, some of them a bit maybe superficial, but we try to cover a whole range. Now you have the chance to ask questions if there's something you miss or you have something on your heart. So far I have not any online questions, but here in the audience I have to admit I can hardly see you because of the light. So if you have questions, just raise your hands and briefly introduce yourself, and then we try to answer your question, or if you want to make a comment, you're free to do that. Yes, okay. There's a microphone. Please introduce yourself briefly, and then.
My name is Sven, and I've been living in Germany for 12 years now, Berlin about 5 years. And I think, Kenneth, you were there the last time. So
I recognize you.
It's really nice to see you back again. I think we raised the issue a lot about what all information one reads about India in German papers. And you see that's missing. A lot of that information is missing. So when I'm looking at Twitter shouldn't be the right place to look for, but that's now the new possibility because mainstream media has completely taken over. And then I show it to my husband and tell my family about it. Friends are like, really? This is what's happening in India? So I think your focus on India or the stories in Dats talks about, I just find them not really, contemporary in many ways. Like today there was something about water, Mangal in slums. And I'm like, I don't know what the issue is. This issue is it's there, but I didn't understand why this is being raised in what context. Because in rural India, the problem is even worse. There's intersectionality, there's a caste system, and this is there in the papers every day. So I just feel that somewhere the Tats as well doesn't do a great job in covering the issues. Lynching. The lynching issue is so rampant. But I've really not read anything about this very seriously, like a whole page article about lynching. And it's not just Muslims, like even the Christian community is under attack. That I hardly see as well. So I have a feeling that this focus on certain things because they have highlights and they are eye grabbers or eye catchers is what Tats goes for. It's my particular feeling. I don't know about the other papers. And second point, because I've also been looking at the startup industry in Germany, and this paranoia about startup and accelerators in Indo-German. This is the time to speak beyond the silos, because you're talking to people here who know the issue. We're really not talking to the people who don't know this issue. So the fact that you're glamorizing trade with India, countries like India, so much without bringing the political issues and the social issues in mind, I feel this is a gap that needs to be stemmed somehow. I don't know, I don't have answers, but that's my comment. And of course, a lot of other comments. It was lovely to hear you. After 3 years, I think you've got fantastic experience, but we'll have a talk about it after this. Thanks.
I think that's more a comment regarding my work, as I'm mostly in charge of Indian affairs at our newspaper. I mean, I'm not in charge of the environmental reporting and the water reporting, but I can say we had a huge series on water, and we had huge stories on water, let's say in Mumbai and other places. I might agree that on rural water problems we have maybe underreported, while maybe in Mumbai we have reported a lot, as our correspondent is based there. And we had not only focused on India, but on other countries as well. There were several correspondents cooperating. It was a huge project for, I don't know, a year or so, and we put a lot of efforts in it. So, yeah, I mean, especially on water, I would say we were quite good, or compared with others, even better. Of course, we came across today already that India is very diverse, very big. There are places in India you are not allowed to go, yeah, so if we cannot send somebody to Manipur, for example, yeah, I mean, not only because it might be dangerous, but you won't get a visa there. I mean, in the Indian government doesn't allow any foreign reporter going to Manipur. So, yeah, and I have to say we are proud that we have at least a colleague in India covering the country for us, but you know, it's a huge country. So I admit that that person cannot cover everything. Also, going to Kashmir is extremely difficult. She has been there once, but not been able to be there for a long time and be going that into in depth. So yeah, I mean, I would agree that basically I can understand what you say. Also, I would tell it to maybe Indian media when they report about Germany. I also would say probably it's not the picture I have of Germany and my experiences. I think it's a big challenge, and I think we try to do our best. And the idea of this event today is to provide a bit different pictures. I mean, having Indians talk about their country, having, for example, what Monika said about the moon mission is probably quite different. And as I would see it, but I appreciate it that there's a different view, and it's important to take that into consideration.
Can I add just one thing about
course. Go
media?
Ahead. Yeah.
So I thank you so much for raising this. I think you don't read these things in Western media is because, first of all, editors and Western media, I would not say editor, Western media, they want to show a kind of very fancy picture. I don't have any clue why. Because if you go in India, after every 10 steps, you see suffering. And after maybe million steps, you see one development. But this is not the idea what Western media wants to project. So when I am asked to submit stories in some papers, they want environmental stories, yes. They want climate change stories, yes. But they have to be positive. They have to be happy stories. I don't know why there's this obsession, and it's just increasing more and more. I'm not saying that there should be just bad stories or stories that make you feel depressed and things like that, but news was never supposed to be happy. It was supposed to be about reality. And there's this fancy of making everything nice and at least okay. This fascination is very weird, especially in the Western media, because in Western media, if you see their news coverage, they are so on the point. If a minister is going to have a party with his friends, they will accuse that, okay, why they are going to a party and why they are having all of this. But here in India, if a minister goes to party with the man who money laundered in India, it's okay. But who will print these reports? Because Indian media can't do it anymore. So Western media has to do it. Otherwise, there's no other scope that I see. That was totally a personal comment.
Yeah, sorry.
What's your perspective?
No, it's a very important question, and I think, Sven, you can sort of help me if I'm wrong on this one. But I'm coming from a logistical point of view on this. Purely based on what my other German journalist friends who've covered India, because previously I've done this fellowship where they went to India and we came to Germany. That's when the last talk was as well. The visas, first of all, is an issue. So you can't just go on a tourist visa to India and write about India. So the government or the embassy here wants to know why you're going and then keeps a very strict check on you and the work you've done in order to approve of it and then after, right? So there's that one layer of why I suppose not a lot of journalists end up going to India, at least on tourist visa. The other thing then is language. So within India, a lot of journalists like Monika who write for foreign publications obviously don't speak German enough to write it. And if I had to write for German publication, I can't. So there's that language barrier there as well. So a lot of journalists who want to freelance in India for German publications don't do that. So what I see happening is a lot of Germans have stringers in India, who will have this one person they will tie on to, and then that one German journalist would then translate and write, and the information comes from stringers. And I don't think that's the best way to do it as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I just can say we don't have stringers.
The Tots as a correspondent.
You can say that's a disadvantage because we only have one person. Okay, that person has a few contacts, but not real stringers because, to be honest, we don't have the money to pay stringers. I know stringers in many countries who earn much more than we earn. So that person has to write the stories herself and try to research the things herself. And that is a challenge in such a big country in India. And I think she does it relatively well. And and also one has to say that our interest in India is still limited. I think it's growing, but it is still limited. And we have, in our front desk, we try to cover the whole world, and India is only one country. And I don't think that there has to be something positive, but as you said, but I think we see people not just as recipients of politics, but also as actors. So if they are affected by climate change, by economic policy, and the like, we also want to see or describe how they are reacting to it and how civil society is dealing with it. And so we try not to just focus on big politicians, but also on civil society on the ground. I think that's our idea. It's not always possible. Also, you need a lot of space for it. Okay. I don't see urgent questions. Also, I have to admit that there's one. Okay, but that will be the last one. I have to admit that time is over, but you should have the chance to say something. Keep it short, please.
Comment and adding to Tasneem, as people who are watching and working with people in India since 30 years, we are happy that this is happening here and we can hear live from you what's actually happening in India, and maybe this is the way so that we can hear more live. And I wanted to add that visa is a problem, and I can imagine that also living in Mumbai, writing is also dangerous. I mean, we have to openly say that, what can you write? What subjects can you take up? And it's good if civil society who is working on India is happy if India gets a focus in the taz also, because we are pointing out things in Turkey or wherever things happen. And in India, we have to work against this image of yoga country. I mean, everybody can come here. You can go to Schöneberg. There's the Brahma Kumari somewhere. They can open a yoga center, and nobody is asking them, what is your idea of democracy? What do you think? What do you think of your Muslim neighbors? There's 200 meters, there's a mosque. So it is a subject. And friends of us, they don't get a visa if they want to work with university things and so on.
Okay, I thank you very much. Then we come to a close. Before, I want to announce our next Asia talk, and I please ask for the picture being shown. It is about German-Cambodian relations. We don't have a title yet, but it is in German only. We will show a documentary about the relations between East Germany and the then so-called Kampuchea. And then we discuss about 30 years of official relations between the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Federal Republic of Germany. We will also talk about the first German soldier who was killed on foreign soil after Second World War. That happened in Cambodia also 30 years ago. And therefore, please be cordially invited for October 12th, again here, live and online. And then if you are interested on our Asia talk, we are on Facebook as well. So if you search for the name of Hansen's ASEAN talk, not Asia talk, ASEAN's talk, in one word on Facebook, there you will not only find announcements of all our talks and including their recordings, but also links to all the Asia-related articles of taz as soon as they are published. Yeah? So if you are on Facebook, Hansen's ASEAN Talk in one word, you will find that. And finally, I want to thank the team of taz Marketing for technically organizing this event, and of course the technical crew of the taz Canteen for the light, the film, and the sound. And of course, a big hug to Monika and to Kenneth, and to all of you who attended here live and online. Remember, you can still watch it on YouTube, and many thanks, and see you again.